Why, hello there. Carr here. Today, I am proposing a new piece of legislation, and I hope that I can convince you to support me in this endeavor. I am proposing a complete and comprehensive ban on craft beer. All craft brew will be completely banned. All stock will be surrendered and destroyed. And after the passage of this law, anyone in violation of consuming craft beer in any amount will be charged with possession at the federal level, a charge that could carry a possible jail sentence as well as hefty fines. Why, do you ask? Well, I have it on good authority that when people drink craft beer, they become drunken, reckless monsters while under the influence. They destroy property, they violate women, and they rebel against authority. So if I pass this law, we will go to all the tap rooms and breweries with stone pizza ovens and frat houses and take all of their craft beer. We will remove this blight from society and restore order and the rule of law. So I'm asking you to join me in this push to end the horrors of craft beer. Hold on a sec. Hello? Yeah. What do you mean it seems seemingly arbitrary and targeted? There's nothing racial about it. What are you talking about, the demographics of people who largely consume craft beer and own craft breweries? We are just trying to take care of a menace plaguing our society. When I was in high school, there was one really popular teen nightclub. It was located behind a big shopping mall. Friday and Saturday night, it was a great place for adolescents to go and rub up against one another, set to music at an ear-shattering volume. Not really my scene, but I went a few times. Fun place. Incidentally, this club was known for its strictly enforced and somewhat strange dress code. The bouncer would not let you in if you didn't meet the appearance standards outlined on the big sign at the door. I'll run down some of those that I'm able to remember. In the 90s, there were no Tommy Hilfiger branded clothing of any sort allowed in the club. There was also no sneakers or athletic shoes, and no do-rags or skull caps. Yeah, very odd. In the early 2000s, the rules morphed a bit to include no white tees, no untucked shirts, and no black dickies. So you could be forgiven for thinking that there is nothing inherently wrong with this dress code, and in and of itself, their dress code isn't technically wrong. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you find some troubling trends that might raise a few eyebrows. By a show of hands, who remembers the 90s? Oh God. I just realized there are people of drinking age right now who have never spent a day in the 90s. I am so old. Well, I remember the 90s, and the hottest streetwear brand in the 90s was Tommy Hilfiger. Sorry, I'm going to drop the pretense. Streetwear is just the gentrified name for black urban fashion. All of the biggest rappers, even Michael Jackson, wore Tommy Hilfiger. So why would a nightclub ban it? And why sneakers? The 90s is when Michael Jordan and several other pro basketball players went merely from athletes to global brand. Every kid in America was dying to have the shoes of their favorite ball player. In the early 2000s, a few rappers popularized white t-shirts as a fashion. Why would anyone ban those? There's nothing inherently wrong with wearing a clean white t-shirt. Honestly, I kind of miss it as a minimalist fashion. Well, let's say that you wanted to exclude a certain demographic of people. Perhaps a demographic categorized by skin color? Well, you can't ban a certain skin color from your establishment. That would be discrimination and is against the law. But you can make the rules of your establishment specifically targeted toward the culture, trends, and affectations of said demographic. Yeah, this nightclub in my city was known for not wanting black patrons, to the point that they would come up with nonsense dress codes and strictly enforce them. Remember earlier when I mentioned that untucked shirts was one of their dress code violations? I went to that nightclub with my friends after my high school graduation. I didn't even change. I was still wearing my dress shirt and dress pants and dress shoes that I had had on under my gown. I was having a good time and I was dressed to the nines. I was there, getting my groove on. and I decided to be a bit more relaxed and untucked my shirt while I was hanging out with my friends. Shortly after, I was pulled aside by security and walked out of the building for violating their dress code. This isn't new, by the way. We can look back in history and see segregation and discrimination taking place in the form of fashion over centuries. After all, one of the hallmarks of colonialism is cultural erasure, and an easy way to dehumanize an entire ethnic group is to literally criminalize their clothing. And none of that is an exaggeration. In the 1940s, black youth brought Zoot suits into fashion, a flashy style of men's formal wear. This fashion would later be co-opted by Mexican and Filipino youth as a status symbol and means of self-expression. And of course, during a war period of economic turmoil, the United States did what it always does, which is racism, and they blamed the urban youth of Los Angeles for crime and lawlessness. Some white sailors, as well as some off-duty LAPD, started attacking Mexican, Filipino, and black youth en masse, dragging them into the streets, stripping them down, women and children, by the way, and urinating on their suits. And guess what? The local press praised this mob violence, claiming that they were cleansing the streets of hooliganism. The military was called in to restore order during the ensuing riot, as was often the case in race riots, and the city passed a ban on wearing zoot suits in public, because the clothing was clearly the problem. Not the gangs of white sailors who got off a ship and decided to commit some hate crimes, or not the vigilante gang of off-duty LAPD officers literally called the Vengeance Squad who joined in on the violence. Hey, it is a good thing we don't have a problem anymore with racist gangs organized within urban police departments. Oh, right. Well, banning suits because you don't want to be around the people who wear them traditionally. Banning certain brands or articles of clothing solely because you want to keep your nightclub full of twerking teenagers whiter than an Imagine Dragons fan club. These are examples of de facto discrimination. They can't explicitly state no black people allowed, but they can make the environment so hostile and unwelcoming to black people that it's not worth the hassle to exist in that space. But it's one thing to cultivate a lily-white nightclub or maintain the stick-in-the-rear bland fashion of coldly indifferent European societies. It's another thing entirely to codify de facto segregation and discrimination into law. What if we weren't talking about clothing? What if we were talking about drugs and crime? What if you knew that black people and Hispanic people and anti-war protesters were regular users of a fairly harmless herb? Just make it an illegal substance of the highest severity and punishable by lengthy prison terms, knowing that generally they have less money and therefore have less ability to mount successful legal defenses. Now you have the means to legally incarcerate and disenfranchise people of color, and the red and blue politicians will both applaud. As long as it keeps the white middle class happy and not having to think about the needs of others. Also, it should be important to note that de facto racism doesn't even have to be intentional. Funding the public school program via property taxes when the inner city disproportionately suffered from depressed wages and neglected neighborhoods leads to the schools to this day that are still de facto segregated, no better than they were prior to Brown v. Board of Education. Now then, I mentioned disenfranchisement earlier, so that brings us to Georgia here in the modern day. But honestly, actions like the ones taken by the conservative legislature in Georgia recently are just another entry in a long line of racially motivated election tampering done by conservatives in this country. Think about it. At the federal level, we banned the practice of literacy tests and poll taxes. These were clearly being used to disproportionately rob black Americans of their right to participate in democracy. But that's okay. If you are a pale, right-wing rodent, you can just demand new and arbitrary voter ID laws. It's not putting a financial barrier to voting, it's just making you take a day off work during business hours, only on weekdays, to stand in line to pay money for a government ID, and that's all just to be able to participate in democracy. There's nothing illegal about that, right? How is it racist? Everyone has a driver's license, right? No. Don't worry about the very clear demographic lines of people who primarily use public transit as their means to get around. That is irrelevant. What, let people vote early? No, that can lead to fraud. Every voting demographic works jobs where they can take 2 hours off on a Tuesday, unpaid, and go to the polls, right? Again, ignore the demographics of people who primarily work low-wage hourly jobs. And it's okay if we allow gun permits as acceptable IDs, but not college student IDs. That's not okay. Regardless of the stated intention, the result of these voting restrictions is laser focused on making voting harder and harder for Black Americans. Georgia is hot. It's criminally hot in Georgia. Honestly, that weather is just uncalled for. And this is a state that has closed several polling locations, conveniently located in multiple minority precincts. And this results in long lines just to be able to cast your ballot. It's already really difficult to vote in parts of Georgia, and that assumes that you don't have any kind of neurodivergence or disability that would make standing in a massive line for hours impossible. And then they went and took away the ability to make that process slightly less miserable. This is de facto racism and disenfranchisement in its purest form, and it is destroying our country. The effects that this is having on our democracy are very real and very tangible, and it's very clear that a certain, shall I say, demographic of people are responsible. So once again, for the sake of the nation and to restore law and order, join me in my totally not racist and completely nonpartisan effort to ban the sale of craft beer and prosecute those who continue to consume it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please click like and subscribe. And make sure to click the bell to see more videos and leave a comment telling me what else we should ban for the good of the country. Also follow me on Twitch where I stream games and give lectures, and be sure to follow me on Twitter where I engage in radical centrism and sing the praises of electoralism. And if you're so inclined to support the channel, I do have a Patreon. Thanks again.